Hey, guess the other video mic didn't work. I think this one should work. It looks like it's working on my side. So I'm just going to redo the video. Shouldn't take too long. So the topic for today was about rules in CSGO, or specifically how I personally define them. When you go to the analyst desk, for instance, they have to use very broad terms like star, support, AWPer, or leader. And the reason is obvious. They just don't have enough time. If you wanted to like break it down further, you need to give them more time generally, and that's just not feasible in the current layout of CS:GO tournaments. At least I don't think it is. I maybe you could do it for finals or semifinals, but I guess it would depend on the organizer if they want to do that or not. So the other reason I made this video is because there's kind of like a pushback against using those terms generally, because it fails to perfectly describe everything a CS player should be doing or is doing within a particular game. So that's also another problem. That's also another problem with it. So I thought I'd try to help break it down from my point of view, because for context, I've only been watching the game for maybe 3 years now, so I probably have some things I'm missing, but these are just general things I've come to see after watching a bunch of these games and thinking about the game a lot. So first of all, I will destroy roles that I don't think actually exist, even though some people claim they exist. The first is the pistol role. I don't think there's such thing as a pistol role player. That makes no sense. Dennis might be one of the best pistol players in the world, but that's not his primary job. It's just a bonus. It's just something you're good at or you're not. Same thing with clutch role. There's no such thing as being a clutch role player. That also makes zero sense. I'm not sure where that comes from. And finally, there's no such thing as nade throw role. I know this is, and similar to the other two rules, in that this is just something everybody should be doing. Like, and then how good you are at it is very dependent upon how much time you put in, and then how much you need it is also dependent upon what roles you're taking. But I actually think if you wanted to be a great player, you have to have some semblance of this, because you have to have at least the basics down, or else you're going to be stuck in like weird situations where you need to throw the smoke, or you need to throw the flash, or you need to throw the molly or whatever. And the person who usually does it might be just be dead, because it might be like a 3v3 or 4v4 or whatever. So you have to know the basics of that. So there's also no such thing as nade throw rule, even though primarily the best support players in the world generally are all good nade throwers, at least from what I've seen. Right. The first thing to do when you're trying to break down rules is this. You need to break it down to two sides, because I feel T side and CT side are basically work differently, even though both sides can be broken down to three phases. I had a video about this before, but I'll talk about it briefly now. Each structured round is broken down in three phases. The first phase is the map control phase, the phase where you're getting information, you're taking over the map, and you're setting yourself up for the hit. The second phase is the actual hit itself, and the third phase is the post-plant situation. And then for the CT side, it's the same thing. You're fighting for the map control for phase 1, the actual defense of the hit in phase 2, and then phase 3 is the retake. So first, you want to talk about phase 1 for the T side, and generally this is where things get complicated, because when we talk about things like star role or support role, there's not actually a specific thing any any like team does, generally speaking. So for instance, you would think, for instance, whoever has the op should be the primary star of the team. That's obviously not the case. Adren from Team Liquid was the primary operator of that team, but he was not, years ago, but he was not, in any sense of the word, a star player. In the same sense, Alu is a kind of a weird choice, but I don't think he was truly the star player of FaZe when he was on FaZe. I felt he was more like a supportive, like consistent role player, if that makes sense. Like he could make entry picks, and he had like specific areas he was good at, or specific roles he was playing at, but he was never the primary focus of that team. It felt like that team played more around Nico and Rain primarily. Whereas you go to a team like Kenny S and Oscar, it's pretty clear to me, it should be pretty clear to everyone who's watching, that those two are the two like super carries of their respective teams. Like they're the guys who get shit done, or like who are set up to get shit done. The team helps them get the entries on both sides of the map. The team helps them set up in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of every like situation of every map, because they're such versatile, such strong players that they will always, if you get them the op and you play around them, you will always have a chance to win the round, no matter the situation, right? So like I said, star players, support players, like it's a completely relative role. Like Coldzera is like a very good choice, a very good example, and one that like creates the most confusion, because a majority of the support players do what Coldzera does, I guess, where he's like the third one in, he's throwing the nades, he is doing passive map control generally, not always, but generally, and like he's helping facilitate other players in the beginning phases of the round. Because when you talk about star players, majority of them are like players who want to get into the action, whereas Coldzera doesn't want to get into the action immediately. What Coldzera does is he tries to go into the he's like a master of phase 2 and phase 3, where he's like he either like clears out the site and then he wins the retake, or he wins like the post plant. And the reason he's like a master of this is because I'll get back to it later, but the reason he's master of this is because he is the best 3v3, 2v2, 2v3, 3v2. Basically, he's the best small man situation player in CS:GO, and has been, I'd say, for the last like year and a half, maybe 2 years. Well, whatever. So, getting back to the rules, right? So when you talk about phase 1 T side, you can generally, when you talk about map control, there's generally 3 or 4 rules you can think about. The first is the aggressive map control, and this is generally where the majority of star players are put to work. Kenny S, Device on long and overpass, Fur, Mirage, underpass to connector, Oscar, any like you can be put into action anywhere. That's the feeling I get when I watch Maz. Basically, these are Adren on Nuke, for instance, might be a good example, and these are all players where their job is to take map control, but they have to do it by going out there and like fighting, generally speaking, or getting ready to take a fight. Whereas the other type is defensive map control, and this is relegated, generally speaking, to the support players: Taco, Zipnix, NBK, like players like these, right? Where basically their entire job is, generally speaking, is not to go out there and fight, but to like take passive angles, to hold areas, hold them passively. So what happens is their job isn't so much as to go out there and get kills like the aggressive map control players. Their job is to hold where they are and kill anybody that comes into them, or that's the best case scenario, or it's to like fall off and to feed that information to their team. And I feel like the priority of what each player is trying to do is very different. The aggressive map control player is going out there trying to get kills. The defensive map control player is out there trying to stay alive, trying to stay alive for as long as he can, and feed that information to the other players, so the leader and like the star players know how to play off of that. The third role for map control is generally the facilitator. So generally, when you're talking about like how teams split up for defaults, it could be something like 3-1-1 or 1-2-1-1, or in SK's case 1-1-1-1-1, but that's like a very specific example. But basically, the areas where you're getting like 2 or 3 players, there's one player who's going to be like the aggressive map control player, and the other 2 are going to be helping that guy take over the map. So for instance, if it's an AWP player, this is like a move Apex does pretty often, where like he will jump bait himself like with his knife across like Ivy or something, to like draw the crossfire of the AWPer at Ivy on the CT side, and then Kenny S will come in, peek, and kill that guy. And so at worst you get a 1-for-1 trade. At best you get you just kill the guy before you can do anything. Like that's one example. Another example is like when you're throwing a bunch of nades. To take over a specific area. Another example is if you're holding an angle, so that you're holding an angle so that somebody else can make a move up somewhere else on the map. So, like Cajun B is a good example of this on North, where he's never the primary aggressive like map control player. Like his job is to hold a specific angle so that his team doesn't have to worry about that specific angle, so they can work on something else. So, like in the old North when they were digging toss and they had like Rubino on the team. This is generally how they would work out overpass, right? Cajun holds on T side. Cajun would hold like hold towards long, so that if anybody peeked out long, he'd take them out. MSL config would take over middle, and like MSL would use himself would throw the nades, but he would also use himself as like a sacrificial entry for config to like trade if anything happened. Magus would play the solo aggressive map control area in underpass, and Rubino would hold passively at the B side, though sometimes. And then now you're gonna get into the fourth role, which is like the counter aggression role. And what the counter aggression role is generally what happens when you're it's not technically a role, but it's just something I've noticed, so I just called it that. But basically it's a role where if some shit happens on the other side of the map, like a player, one or two players goes down on long or mid of like overpass, the B player at overpass will immediately go out there and make a move to like either even it up or get information. So Taco used to do this all the time for SK when SK used to be good on that map with FNX. Zipnix does this. NBK, I remember NBK does this. Like that's generally what counter aggressive type player is. I think Rubino used to do it when he was like that type of supportive player. I haven't seen as much of him on Dignitas. I think he's like leader now, so it's probably different. So those are the general like types of roles you can talk about, and as to whether or not one's a star player or one's a support player. Generally speaking, generally speaking, the playmakers are the star players. But like I said, you might have like a star player who's the passive type. So think Coldzera, and in that case, he'd be the guy doing the passive map control, and like he's help facilitating the other players get into positions. So like I said, it's very dependent upon the players you have and what their strengths are. Because technically, like CS:GO is similar to Dota 2 in that, regardless of what role you play, you still have a chance to carry so long as you're good enough, and that should be the case in CS:GO. Though obviously a majority of teams are like structured in certain ways where the playmaker is the star player. So we go into the phase 2, and this is generally, I think, there's like three types of roles, I guess you could call them. The first is the entry, and there are two types of entries you can think about. There's like a carry entry, and the carry entry is a bit different from what normal entries are, because the carry entry is like a player that everything is set up for them to succeed. So they create the entire execute based helping this one guy kill people. So like they'll like eliminate a bunch of like the angles and spots for him, and then they'll have like a bunch of players like follow up and trade for him. Generally speaking, this is like a bit rarer relative to the other entry, which is what I call the sacrificial entry, and this is more of what Apex or what Taco or Freiburg used to play on NIP. The sacrificial entry is the guy who just runs in like solo, takes on all the aggression, and his job isn't to actually kill people. His job is to create space, and then if he happens to kill people, that's like fucking huge bonus. But it doesn't always happen, and it shouldn't be expected of them to make it happen. It's just too hard to do. It's too hard of a role in that sense to consistently make that work. So those are the like entry types of roles. The second type of role is like the second in or third in, and this type of role is very dependent upon who you have. So for instance, like, all right, I think Big, for instance, they use Tabson as like a carry entry type, and then they have a bunch of players come in and trade for him, and they're like support type players. Whereas you look at North, I think MSL as the support entry. He's like a sacrificial entry. He's baiting himself. That he's using himself as complete bait for either AZ or Config to clean up. And in that case, the star player of that team is either Config or AZ. And that's also why AZ comes under a lot of fire for his play, just because he's not doing. Like basically MSL is trying to setting him up so hard he's not really delivering. So that, at least relative to like what Config is and what they need to succeed as a team. So that's why he comes under more criticism than other players on that squad, because he's getting those resources and he's not delivering. At least from my point of view, maybe they think about it differently than I do. The third rule is the lurk rule, and this is a hard rule to define because it's very dependent upon the play style of the particular player. So for instance, Happy is known for the passive lurks, just getting that information and showing some presence, but I think that style is completely outdated. I know Sean Garris did a video about it, but I think the problem with Happy style is he's too predictable. So they know not to worry about him, or they know what angles he's coming from, so he has to mix it up. I think that's like his problem right now. But it's like a classic rule, and it's one that still can have relevance, but it can't be the only way you play the lurk rule. I feel like the lurk rule is no longer a role you can play in the same way over and over again. It's like a role you have to change up every round depending upon the situation, depending on the feel of the game and like the pace of the game. The second way to play lurk is the lurk entry, and I call this like the Danish lurk, I guess, because it's something that I first noticed in the heroic lineup with Glaive and Madi, where Madi became a very good player, or not very good, because he became a very good like lurk type player, but it felt more like he was. Like what was happening was he was like going out there by himself and it just straight up fighting. And you call this like the lurk entry rule because what happens is on the lurk he will be the first one to initiate contact before the actual like 4-man hit. If it's like a 4-1, for instance, he will be the first one to initiate contact with the enemy, and then that will draw the enemy towards him. And then there's a high chance he'll die. But because he did all this, he will force the enemy to rotate towards him, and this gives the actual hit a higher percentage chance of success. At the same time, the reason you call this the lurk entry rule is because if the team decides just to do a 5-man hit, Madi will still entry, and the reason for this is just to create the how do you say? It's like to create like an illusion, I guess, or like a flex pick where it's a strategy where it helps mask what you're doing because if you have Madi as both lurk and entry and he's doing both, the other team is never sure where the other 4 teammates are. So for instance, in the 2015 era of Team Liquid, when there was Hiko, Adren, Nitro, Elige, was it Fugly? I think Fugly was the 5th. The essential problem with that particular team was they had the roles down like pat, but the problem was they never deviated from the rules. So you actually needed at points for Hiko just to be the entry fragger, not because he's good at it, I don't think he is, but because if the other team sees Hiko by himself lurking, they immediately know the other 4 are on the other side of the map, and that's too much of a tell. You cannot give away that kind of tell, and this is why I call it the Danish lurk, is because they make it pretty hard for the other team to figure out what exactly is happening. And I feel like the current best player at this style is Dupree. And then we go on to the third type of lurk, which is like a pressure lurk. I'm not even sure what to call this, but basically it's whatever the fuck Phelps does. And Phelps, what he does, or what I've seen him do, is like he puts on a lot of pressure. As in, like, it always feels like he's always, like, 1 or 2 seconds away from just going out there and killing the other guy. And, like, this is, like, SK's patented 1-1-1-1-1, like, strategy or whatever. Or basically he's putting on a lot of pressure, so it's like, similar to, like, what Happy does, except it's in a much more aggressive position, and it's much more threatening, and you're getting the information, but at the same time, it's, like, much more dangerous. You are much more liable to die. You're much more liable to die. You have to be really honed in, and it just happens that Phelps is good enough as a player, and his team is good enough as a team to play off of that they get away with it. I haven't seen any other lurkers like do that sort of oppressive like pressure style. And then the final type is the staggered lurk, or the like interceptive lurk, I guess. I'm not certain what to call it, but basically this type of lurk, their job isn't really to like clean up the round. Their job is like a supportive type where they're just clearing off certain angles for the retake. So there was a play, I think, I forget the round in the game, but FaZe on Cash used to run this tactic where they would hit 4-man on A, and then they would boost Kiyoshima and just leave him in the middle. And then the whole point of doing that was after the execute, there's generally only three directions in which a retake can happen. They can either go all the way around and try to hit them from the back. They can rotate from vent. They can rotate from vent or middle, or they can rotate from the car side. And then by leaving Kiyoshima there, he's covering two of the three. So everybody on the site that's still alive should immediately know where the retake is coming from, if it's coming. And the reason I call this staggered is obviously because they get the lurker player in this like type of position gets the sometimes gets the choice of like hitting in like a third wave kind of attack, or sometimes it's not enough to just hold there for the angle. Sometimes you have to go out there and fight, just because you need a bit more firepower to finish the hit, and that's why I call it like a staggered hit. Really, I'm not actually sure what to call it, but it's like it's like very different from like the pure entry or like the pure passive, or like the one, or like all that stuff, right? So I'm still working on that one. And then you have to go to when you talk about T side, I feel like the AWP is such an important weapon to talk about because it can be used in a variety of ways depending upon the skill of your team. So obvious choices for phase 1 type AWPing, where their job is to like break open areas, is Kenny S, Oscar, Device. They're all really good at this. In phase 2, a majority of AWPers do like the similar thing where they take the good angle, they hold off for the site, and then the exceptions to that are dependent upon like what type of AWPer you have. So if you have a good like CQC AWPer or combat AWPer, like Kusta I think can do it, Rick I think can do it, Henny, KNG, Kenny S obviously, Oscar obviously, like these type of players, they can use the AWP kind of like a rifle where they can go second or third in and then just kill people like running with the AWP. It's kind of weird, but I've seen them do it, and they can, and it's like surprisingly powerful just because they're such good AWPers. And then the third type is like I'm not even sure if you call this a rule. It's just I've only relegated it to one person, and that's like Oscar is basically the post plant carry, because in a majority of cases the post plant is supposed to be about having a good setup, what nades, like, and then after that you have to improv, like what the nades are, what information do you have, how do you play off your teamwork, stuff like this. This is generally how you win the post plant, but I have to make an exception for Oscar just because he wins so many post plants. I feel like he's created a role kind of, where he's like, oh yeah, once you get into the post plant and if I'm alive and then up, I just win the game. Like that's kind of the feeling I get when I watch Oscar play T side for Mouse currently. So those are generally like the rules for the T side. Then you go to the CT side. The CT side, like I said, it has 3 phases, and another way I've talked about it is the 3 types of defense. The preemptive defense, where you break them before they get there. Arguably the best type of defense, just because, you win. It's easier to win if they have nothing to begin with. But it's also the riskiest, because you're also risking your own pieces on the board, so to speak. The second type of defense is hard defense, where you fight them on the site. You fight them on the site. And the third type of defense is soft defense, where you try to stay alive as long as possible, and then you play for the team. And if it's not clear, I think like majority of star players or star role players are in the first types of defense, hard defense and preemptive defense, and then the more supportive type players are in the soft defense because they have less skill, they have less firepower, so their job is to help facilitate their team. Right. So we go to phase 1. I feel like the current best, and even though Fur is dropping off a little bit, I feel like Fur has been by far the best CT-sided entry, like phase one preemptive defense player in all of 2017, better than any AWPer, which is surprising because generally this should be an AWPer's role, but Fur is just so freakishly good at it, and the problem with like for everybody else against Fur is he makes a bunch of like different routes as to how he does it, but at some point like there's only so many ways he can run it, and there's so many, and every team should know he's coming, but no team has really found a great way to stop him from coming, and that's kind of the Fur problem for everybody else that's not SK, where like he's so powerful and so aggressive, like he just breaks open the CT. He can break open the CT side all by himself before anybody else even sees action. Like it's really fucking crazy. Then another role, I guess you could call it the counter aggressor role, like similar to the T side, where some shit happens on one side of the map. A player is generally designated to immediately go find information or go make a play on the other side of the map. And like I said, I'm not even sure if this is a role so much as it is just good CS. I will say there are teams that don't do this, and I have to assume it's just because it's so obvious that because it's the correct move, it's so obvious that they're just like mind gaming the other guy into like wasting time waiting for the default, and then they do it at a layered moment. So, or they do something else. Right. So you go into the phase two, and when you talk about a phase two play, there's a few ways you can think about it. Like I said, there's like the hard anchor. I think about it like this. Each site has one true hard anchor. And what I mean by hard anchor is like not really like hard defense, but more like a guy whose entire job is just to play on that one site. So for instance, Taco is the hard anchor for SK on B side Mirage. And his job is to always like stay on the site, so to speak. But he does do info / playmaking role on that side, like the phase one side. So it's kind of like I said, this is why a lot of people don't really like using these terms, like because it's not very specific. It's not specific enough to cover everything. But generally speaking, that's like his priorities, just like staying on the site, and then he'll sometimes do the info / playmaking. And you would usually, for a majority of other teams, this would designate that this guy is the star, because majority of star players have the mindset of I want to go out there, I want to fight, I want to win this game for us. Whereas Taco isn't really doing that because of those reasons. He's doing it because this is what's best for his team. Because their best player on SK is coldzera, and coldzera's best like attribute or best like area of dominance is the small man situations. It's like the 3v3s, 2v2s. So you don't want to waste him in the phase one. That's where you use somebody like somebody like Taco, somebody like Fallen to like go out there and make those plays. And that's kind of how I think about it. And like the other way you can think about it is besides anchoring, there are players like who also have like the second priority role of rotating. So their job is to like go over to the other side of the map if they feel like something is off. And like I said, Taco and coldzera's a great example of this. And the way this works, generally speaking, if you have like a 2-man site, I feel like, and you look at the way the SK have built it, they have one really great soft defense type player in Taco, where like his job is to stay alive as long as possible, and they have coldzera, who they move around and rotate. And this is a great choice just because what happens is, if in a 4v5 for instance, if they hit Taco will stay alive for an incredibly long amount of time relative to like what should be expected, and that by the time he's stalled out enough, the SK players will have showed up, and they have a good chance for the retake. Whereas if the team goes to the other side, they have to play a stack of 3, and that's favorable for SK anyway. And then finally, there's the phase 3, which is like the retake. I don't actually think there's like a master of retake. It's like I said, it's very dependent upon like the defense of it's very dependent upon the teamwork of that particular team, the nades, the situation, the time. There's too many different factors you have to think about for there to be an actual rule. Unlike the Oscar role, I guess you could call it, for the T side of post plant. And the reason I've brought this up, the reason I've been thinking about it lately, is because if you think about SK's strengths and weaknesses, coldzera is their best player by far. If you just look at the stats, obviously, but it's what you have to look at the types of kills he's getting, and the most impact kills he gets are generally in 3v3 small man situations, or 2v2, 2v3, 3v2, whatever. Like these small man situations, right? I think this is where coldzera is by far the best player in the world. I don't think anybody has matched him for like an year at least, or could be even more than that. I have to go back and check. But basically, the reason coldzera is so strong is because his fundamentals are incredibly strong. So you can't catch him out. Like you can't hide anywhere because he'll check, right? So he won't die that way. Secondly, his game sense and game knowledge seems to be extraordinarily high for star players. So he understands how like the rounds are structured and what's happened within the round, and how each of the players are reacting to that. And in like these small man situations, basic CS is generally the best way to play. This is why Fnatic was so strong during their era when they were the greatest of all time. This is why SK in particular is so strong, is because they have such strong fundamental basic CS in these situations. So they're able to play off of each other despite there being like double the area to cover with only like half the manpower. So if you think about all these roles, and you think about the small match situations of coldzera, like another reason coldzera is so good at this is because he's actually surprisingly versatile. Not as versatile as like I think Nico's arguably the most versatile superstar player we have right now, but coldzera is pretty versatile. He's very good at playmaking. He's very good at lurking. He's very good at like entering. Well, actually, I won't say he's very good at all these things, but he's good enough at all of these things to like not be immediately like fail at them. So, and if you add in like his game sense, his awareness, his fundamentals, and his skill, and the fact that he creates the best passive angles for himself every single time he gets into a duel. This is why coldzera is like a monster basically, and this is also why the conclusion I've come to is that the reason SK have had problems with Astralis, and particularly coldzera, is because Astralis is the only team you can say has better fundamental basic CS than SK does. So in these 3v3s, these 2v3s, these 3v2s, whatever, they don't make the same mistakes other teams will make. They don't have the same exploits to make that coldzera can take care of. So it becomes a much harder task for coldzera to like destroy them. And it requires a higher level of performance out of coldzera, whereas like coldzera's average day is enough to destroy most teams, but for Astralis in particular, I think he has to go god mode if he wants to destroy them in that situation, or he did. I mean, it's changing now because I feel like Astralis is breaking down a little bit, and so is SK. So it's hard to say in the future, but this is how it's been for most of 2017. If you look at the past, anyway. So that's that's why coldzera destroys so many other teams except Astralis, at least from my point of view. So this is just a general summary of the different roles that are played in CS:GO right now. Probably missing some. Probably missing some, but this is just a good way to start. Maybe somebody else will follow up, or maybe somebody else will give me a better. Will show me something like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense. But for now, this is good enough, and hopefully this helps people understand CS on a deeper level, or at least on a level where on my level, I guess. See ya.